G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder. Now, I've covered the A2D before. I've actually done a video of it in ground forces, but today we're going to cover it in air battles. Now, the A2D is perhaps one of the more different planes. You know, each plane in this game is somewhat unique, of course, apart from the carbon copies, but for the most part, there is a nuance, or at least one little thing different with every plane. This particular plane is kind of special because it has such incredible shaft horsepower. I think it's like 5,100 shaft horsepower, something ridiculous like that, on a prop. Now, on the dev server, when I did a little 2-minute video of it in a test flight, I believe it had something like 10,000 pounds of thrust, which is what the F4 Phantom has. And since it's been rectified, it's not that bad, actually. It's pretty nice. It is kind of interesting, though, because it's kind of like an AD4, but instead of trading the maneuverability, you get a turboprop. It feels really weird, I will say that. It does not feel like a prop, and it does not feel like a jet. It's really strange. The way you kind of play this thing is almost like a prop, but almost like a jet as well. So what do I mean by that? In a jet, what you do is you play speed, and in a prop, you play altitude. You can do neither in this, because at high altitude, you start to lose your performance, and at low altitude, you don't have the energy to keep up with the jets. So what do? You do somewhere in between. What I'm going to do is I'm going to climb to about 4,000, 5,000 meters and then look for targets. Obviously, I want to get as much of an energy advantage as I can over props, and you can see there's an A2D coming straight for me. Now, I expected this guy to have bombs on and to just head for the base, so I was going to leave him. I was going to be a nice guy. But it turns out that he's actually coming straight for me. So I put the nose down briefly, and I turn into him because I know he's going to turn towards me. This will break his turn and basically move out of the way of his guns. I go into the vertical to convert some speed into altitude. I pop landing flaps for a brief second just to slow the plane down just that little bit to get behind him and also to convert into lift. And then I go up again. And as I go up, I play for speed. As I go down, I play for lift and turn. What I do here is I'm going into that vertical and I'm keeping my plane rolling with the A2D. I'm not rolling against him. Basically, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to keep the cockpit facing his cockpit. And I get a beautiful hit. You know, it's fine because I'm behind him. But if it was in any other situation, I would have been a little bit upsetty. As you can see here, I'm still sitting pretty behind this A2D, and he's starting to struggle because obviously doesn't really know how to use his flaps and his maybe his throttle, maybe his air brakes. You don't really want to use air brakes in a 1v1 like that, but if you're desperate, then you're desperate. But I think he's stuffed up beyond reproach, and at this point, that's all she wrote for the A2D1. Now, the way this thing works is kind of weird. It's kind of fast, but at the same time, it's not terribly fast by jet standards. It certainly does hit a high speed on in level flight, something like 550 to 600 kilometers per hour, very easily. But I will say this: if you're facing jets, you can't just play speed. What you have to do with a jet is you have to bait it into a turn, basically, and then when it tries to get away, you use your superior acceleration with that extremely high horsepower, and you just catch them in a turn. One of the good things about the A2D is it has really good acceleration, and this basically translates to a decent climb rate. What you got to do, though, is you got to climb at a certain speed. Never climb at an angle, climb at a speed. You'll be climbing at about 500 kilometers per hour, and this A2D has probably thrown that out the window and is climbing at a much slower speed, which allows me to almost burst climb up into him. And you can see here, I'm able to get some shots towards him, and I take him out with a beautiful, absolute destruction. Absolutely ruin his plane. The A2D has to be one of the strangest premiums. I like it in ground forces, although it's extremely vulnerable when you're going vertical constantly. This plane plays like a jet and a prop at the same time. And that's why I like it. It's something new, something different. And it being a premium, I can totally understand and I can totally get behind. The only issue I see with the A2D is it is extremely good against one or two specific jets that can't really reach terribly high speeds, one of them being the Volksjäger and the other being the 262A. Now, both of them sit at a relatively comparable battle rating, and the Pulchestora, for one, you know, it's not as nice with an A2D around, I will say that. I think there are ways around it though. Because the A2D only has a limited top speed, you can play speed, but obviously if you're stock, that's not going to be fun. There are ways around it, but if you're in a 262, keep an eye out for the A2Ds. They're going to be nasty. They're not going to be impossible to kill or impossible to beat, but you should just watch out for them. The A2D is fairly strong against 262s, mainly because it can accelerate towards them, and the one thing that the 262 doesn't have is acceleration. Acceleration of the 262 is one of the worst in the entire game. Around maybe the P80 as well, something along those lines. The one jet that does best at every single time without fail though is the Horten 229. And I've said this multiple times, but I don't think the Horten 229 should be 7.7. Sorry, it should be 7.3. I think it should be 7.7 because the Horten 229 is just a Wunderwaffe, basically. Now, returning to the gameplay, you can see, pardon me, that the A2D is really, really good at accelerating. I'm able to accelerate towards this ME262, but he's playing it smart. He is above my top speed, and I will never, ever catch him. The A2D is really, really good for catching 262s when they do something like this, however. He's decided to just get overzealous and turn fight for some reason, kind of throwing his whole plane away. And this is exactly where the A2D shines. It has 4 20mm cannons that are very, very similar to A&M 3s, and it does have a radar that tracks out to 1.2, but it's not really reliable, as you can see in the footage. Honestly, the A2D does have its weak spots, and that would be against other props at low altitudes and against jets at high speeds. But as long as a jet is turning with you, you're golden. And as long as a jet is wasting its energy, you're golden. As long as a prop decides, you know what, I'm going to waste all my energy and fight at slow speeds, you can pretty much compensate with your excellent speed. Obviously, you can't do both at the same time, so you've got to be careful with combinations of teams, or combinations of Horten 229 and 262, or Horten 229 and I guess MiG-9. Any such combination will end up pretty much getting you killed. So the A2D, in all honesty, isn't really that overpowered. It's not really that powerful, to be honest. It's kind of balanced, which is really, really nice. It's good to see a balanced plane. In ground forces, this thing is basically an AD4, sort of, something similar to an AM1, but with a much higher battle rating because it has much higher performance. The bomb load is comparable. 20 500-pounders is actually a lot, but considering that this plane doesn't get the high altitude bomber spawn, and with those 20 bombs, you are extremely heavy. Heavier than the B-29. Oh, not heavy. You feel heavier than the B-29, and you don't have the altitude to compensate. So it is kind of a balancing factor, and it is kind of balanced in the grand scheme of things. In tanks, I can understand why people would see it as very powerful, perhaps overpowered, but at the same time, the AD4 has some of the craziest loadouts in the game. And then you have the AM1. And honestly, what you lack in speed with the A2D, you more than make up for in maneuverability, and in some cases survivability, because the AD4 can take a fair few hits. And this is something that a lot of the time people overlook, is the survivability of an aircraft. The A2D can't negative G at all. If you try and negative G above 550, you will rip your wings at 3 or 4 Gs very, very quickly. Things like the AD4 just simply won't see those speeds, so you never have to worry about ripping. This is a bit of a double-edged sword, of course, because SPAA are a thing, but at the same time, if you play yourself smart, you won't get shot down in either. So with this footage here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump a little bit forward because obviously I'm going to land and rearm, and we're having a look at a little dogfight between me and the Arado. Now, obviously this isn't a real proper dogfight. The Arado's running, basically. He's running. He's a 7.3 jet, and he's just bundying out of there, you know. I can sort of catch him up to a certain point, and you can see I'm trying to intercept him, but I don't really have a chance outrunning this guy, and his energy retention is fairly good as well, so there's not a whole lot that I can actually do, in all honesty. This just goes to show that the A2D isn't really that amazing. It's fun, don't get me wrong, it's wild fun. I love it, and I love playing it in tanks, but in ARB, it's not exactly the meta. It's not pay to win as such, which is really nice to see because it's something different. It's premium. You can grind, Silver Lions, RP, you name it. But you can also try something new, try something different. And that's what the A2D is for me. It's one of those premiums that is something different. And that's awesome because there is something that is worth buying. Not because it's overpowered, but because it's a change. It's a sort of side grade, in my opinion, to the AD4, and a side grade to the sort of general feel of super props. It's like a Bearcat, but a little bit fatter, but faster. It's like, and one that doesn't overheat, of course. It's like a P80 that turns kind of well and has really good energy retention and really good low speed handling characteristics. It's a mix between both of these like different styles of gameplay, and it's awesome fun. It's also reasonably well balanced. Obviously in ground forces it's powerful, but at the same time you have something that is almost as powerful at an entire battle rating lower. You also tend to have different ways of shooting things down, and at 6.7 the Germans have the Coelian, and often you'll have pretty decent SPAA that can handle taking out the A2D, especially when it goes vertical. When you go vertical in this thing, you tend to lose a lot of energy, and especially with your bombs. So, you know, take that into consideration when you're fighting. The A2D for me is kind of cool, and you know, if you have the money, I would certainly recommend it. Anyway, ladies and gents, thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the gameplay. Enjoy the Silver Lions that you make from the A2D if you ever pick one up. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.